Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Katie, a member of the CK-12 team, and my colleague Laramie and I will be running today's webinar on Common Core Math on CK-12. We're so glad you've joined us. We've had a great first week for our 2018 Certified Educator Program. This is the last session of the week, and many of you guys are already experts at navigating the CEP Google Class to find assignments and resources, and at using Zoom features such as Q&A to ask the CK-12 team questions, and then chat to network with other educators. Just a reminder, if you want to make sure we get your question and don't miss it in the chat window, please put it in the Q&A option, and then choose all panelists and attendees for anything you want to go to the whole community. With that, let's get started with today's content. So, as I said, today's session is called Common Core Math on CK-12. Specifically, during this webinar, we'll be covering the following topics. Adding interactivity and Plix. So we've started embedding interactives directly within the text of CK-12 Flexbooks, so you'll get to see that today. Our new Common Core State Standard Flexbooks, both accessing and exploring our Algebra 1 and 2 geometry, and then our middle school math books. The first are up and live, the second set we're working on, but you'll get to see a preview of that shortly. And finally, strategies for using CCSS interactive flexbooks. So incorporating these both inside and outside of class time. Before we get into the content, a reminder that the core information for this session, like our other sessions, can be found in the session resource page. It is posted in the matching topic in the CEP Google Class, and we're posting that in the chat window shortly. You can print these before a session or use it as a reference when completing the assignment. So we also want to find out if any of you have explored our book so far and what you are looking for in a Common Core Flexbook. You'll see a poll here in a few seconds that will prompt you to respond to 2 short questions. Have you explored any CK-12 Flexbooks with embedded interactives? You could start with you've already used the CCSS Algebra 1 or Geometry book that are live, have seen them but haven't explored them, or you have not previously seen these books. And then what are you looking for in one of these flexbooks? For this, you can select all that apply. Are you looking for interactivity, guided discovery, examples, practice, and other? If there's something specific that you're looking for that we might not cover, please feel free to let us know in the chat window or email us at Jumpstart, and we can pass those along to that team. So I'm going to pause for a few seconds to let you finish answering this poll, and you're welcome to select more than one answer for that second part, as I said. So we're about 3/4 of the way through people posting. We'll give you guys, just a little bit longer to answer that to help us kind of guide as we work our way through. And it's probably about good, so we're going to wrap up there. Let's share those results with you. So as you can see, most of you might have seen them but haven't explored these books at all, and some of you might not have even seen any of the books on our site because they're kind of in the footer or buried in the appropriate branch. And it looks like a big piece is that interactivity, but also just as important, guided discovery and examples and practice. So between myself and Laramie, we will be talking about and covering all of that. So with that, let's talk about included Plix. CK-12's Plix, which hopefully some of you have joined us or will be joining us for one of the sessions on our Plix and simulations. But Plix stands for Play, Learn, Interact, and Explore. And they include descriptions of the topic, information on how to interact, links to related reads, an interactive frame, and challenge questions that build to higher level thinking and open discussion questions. These Plix can be found through browsing at ck12.org/Plix, and we've started to include these embedded directly in some of our text. Now, I note that right now the ability to embed is a CK-12 team feature. We are working on that for you guys down the road. The next thing we've added in here is our interactives. So in addition to links to full Plix that kind of do a pop-up of that Plix option, you'll see simple interactions, including options to adjust content, drag and drop answer choices, and exploring graphs. So here you can see kind of the text above them, and then the pieces in the interactive kind of embedded directly in that text, custom made to specifically relate to the text that's before or after it as you work your way through. So we'll be showing you what this looks like shortly, but I just want to go through a couple more features about the books themselves. So as I said, they can be found in what we call our Common Core State Standard Flexbooks. And if you guys are a state that doesn't use Common Core, don't worry. Most state standards are pretty similar to the Common Core anyway, so kind of that idea of matching standards allows you to use them, but also customize them to specifically target your state standards. And the interactivity is super exciting for anyone using any kind of exploratory learning or just wanting students to have more interaction in their books. So the first thing is how to access them. So there's a couple of options to access your interactive flexbooks. Right now we have Algebra and Geometry available. And so if you went to either of those branches, you could click on that link, click the high school books, and you would see the options for accessing those CCSS flexbooks. The other option is to see all of the ones that we've published so far by going to the footer under By CK-12 and clicking Common Core Math. You can also see them using the direct link ck12.org/books/standards/CCSS. So if you aren't on the page and you want to go directly there, that short link might be useful for you as you navigate directly to that page. So what books do we have? The new books are designed with Common Core philosophy in mind. That means not only are they correlated to content standards, but they include a combination of active learning, interactives, examples, and review. Right now we have live our Algebra 1, Algebra 2 books completely done, and Geometry books completely done. The Algebra 2 I think is still getting updated a bit as we go, but Laramie can work his way through that as he goes. And the next set that we're working on is our middle school math books, so 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math books. We are developing or have already developed and shared teaching guides for each book, and we'll be talking about those shortly. You can find those books on our system, on a browser, but they're also available in our Flexbooks app in the App Store and Google Play. So definitely check those out if you want to access the books on a tablet or a mobile device and download them for offline use. So I think with that, I'm going to pass this along to Laramie, and he's actually going to show you these books in person.
Hello, everyone. How are you? I am going to play around a little bit today with some of our new interactive Common Core books. Look at my screen share here. Okay, so hopefully you're all seeing my, my startup screen for CK-12. And before I get started, I want to just do a quick review of sort of the philosophical difference between these books and the kinds of offerings that CK-12 has had in the past. As a teacher myself for about 25 years, I worked in a small private school, and most of the work I did was with students that were unsuccessful in other venues. And often I discovered that the way to get them fired up and get them engaged in the content was to do something that was more interactive and more project-based or experiment-based. So I was personally very pleased to start working on this project to create Common Core philosophy-based books for CK-12 that really pushed that thought, pushed the idea of a Socratic, experiential, get your hands dirty sort of learning for the students. And that's what these books are all about. Much of the actual information is similar to stuff that CK-12 has in our other concepts and materials that we've offered before. But the big difference is really in the way that the material is taught now. All of the instruction is taking place as students getting their hands in and trying to figure out how things work so that they understand more of the concept behind the learning instead of just individual ideas and individual questions. So with that, I'm going to use what I consider the easiest way to find these books, and that is to scroll to the bottom of pretty much any page. And under by CK-12 here, we have Common Core Math. If I click on that, we show the 6 books that are currently published. 3 of them are the high school books, and then the other 3 are the associated teachers' guides. Now, in the second part of our session here, I'm going to go a little bit more over the teachers' guides and how they're used. But first, I want to give you some examples of the kind of information that's available in the student versions or the active versions of these books. I'm going to start actually with the geometry book, and I have a few lessons that I've already opened up here. This book was based on our geometry honors book, which was originally written for Common Core, but did not have any actual embedded interactivity when we first released it. So if you've seen some of our content before, this book may look familiar to you, but you'll certainly recognize that it's already designed with that Common Core philosophy, that very experiential look. The new idea now is that throughout every lesson, we have embedded interactivity that's directly related to the content in the lesson. Here we're discussing ASA and AAS congruency, sorry. And as the students scroll through the lesson, embedded with it and along the way, not as a separate sort of an idea, are examples of what the lesson is discussing, and let the students see how these things work in, in a sort of a hands-on manner. Also embedded in the lesson are actual full plixes, and maybe I didn't get an example of that with this one. I'll show you. I guess I'll have to go back. I'll do the plixes in the algebra. The other big thing that we did with our geometry book over the original one was to add a number of questions at the end of the practice, in the review section at the end of each lesson, that are specifically designed with the Common Core philosophy in mind. All of these, usually the last half a dozen questions or so, are project kind of based questions that require the students to actually get in and figure out how things work. So again, pushing very much that Common Core theory and that Common Core philosophy. Additionally, we've given that same kind of treatment to our algebra course. These are examples of some of the lessons in our Algebra 1 CCSS book. And one of the big things I like about this particular book is that there are a number of lessons that build on sort of successive levels of depth in the same interactive. This one is one of my favorites here. It talks about the quadratic model. And it starts off with a little kind of a story about this guy who has a speedboat, and he's racing another speedboat, a friend in another speedboat. And you can see that right away the students jump into questions in the lesson. Rather than a lot of introduction and expository information, the students are immediately presented with questions that they're expected to start feeling through. And in some cases, they're expected to fail. The idea isn't that they're always going to know all the information for solving a question immediately, but that they're supposed to learn how the particular concept works based on trying and sometimes failing to solve some of the questions. And as they move along through, these particular questions build on each other. The first level of interactivity here just has the students do a single interaction between a curve and a line, and they see how the two different functions interact based on the changes in the formulae. Then as they move on down through the lesson, there's more detail added to the interaction. There are more things that they can adapt and more things they can change, and they see the difference in more parts of the formulae. And it goes on through 3 or 4 different levels in this particular example, which I think is great for the students to be able to see sort of the reason we use more than one equation or more than one model in a given situation. So I'm very pleased with the way this is working out as well. Lots of questions here, again, at the end that allow the students to adapt their thinking and try things out. Instead of just answering individual formula, they actually have to design formula and figure out why things work the way they work. So this is, again, just an example of most of the lessons in this book are written the same way. One of the other neat things here is that we've introduced questions that are embedded directly into the lesson as well. Instead of just written questions that they answer on a piece of paper, there are interactive questions here where the students can try and answer things immediately as part of the lesson. And again, with that sort of productive failure thing in mind, they're told right away whether they got things right or wrong, which ones they got right or wrong, and they're expected to try again until they can understand the process. This one here has a total of 12 different formula that they're supposed to understand as they're crossing over into physics a little bit here with this lesson. We've also done the same treatment to our Algebra 2 book. Here's a couple of examples of the applications in Algebra 2. One of the big things I like in the Algebra 2 is this idea of a warm-up that's a direct reflection of a previous lesson. So at the top of pretty much every lesson in our Algebra 2 book so far, you'll see that there's an interactive that's based on material from the previous lesson. So it's sort of a reminder of what they have recently covered. And this one here is just an example of how to apply the rules for multiplying bases and adding exponents, and gives the students sort of a hands-on feel for how that works. And this book also does a lot of the work with the active learning. We called these sections active learning sections because we wanted to make sure that it was clear to the students and the teachers that the questions were the learning. The questions are the instruction. They're not just sort of review and test questions. They're questions that are encouraging you to understand and encouraging you to learn along the way. This lesson here has an example of one of the embedded plixes that I mentioned earlier. In addition to the actual interactives that the students can work directly in the lesson, there are these embedded plixes that open up a separate screen and have questions that go directly along with them. For those of you that are familiar with plixes, this won't look different for you at all. But these can actually be assigned separately from the lesson, so that as a teacher, you will not only know whether or not they've read the material, but also whether or not they've answered the questions in a given plex. So it's kind of a neat little tie-in and gives you a little more comfort as far as knowing that they actually covered all the material. So I think that gives us a quick overview of what's included in these books. In our next section here, coming up in a few minutes, I'll talk a little bit more about how to assign these things, and then what the teacher's guides include to help support you as you're teaching this material. Katie, do you want to jump back in here and see if there's any questions we need to answer?
So I think you've answered most of them at this time. We definitely had a couple about kind of answering questions in there. So maybe you could talk about kind of any questions that are in the text as text versus kind of those interactive questions versus any other piece as you're working your way through.
Certainly. With particularly the newer lessons that we're working on and where we're headed with these books, there will be more than one option for having the students answer questions. The example questions are designed for the students to be able to work through on the spot and see how things work out. Once they've been given an example of how a question works, there'll sometimes be questions that they're expected to, like the active learning here or the review questions, that they're supposed to present the teacher with solutions for, so that you can see that they understand that material. In those cases, you can either ask the students to answer on another piece of paper, or for the case of the interactives, what I've been doing with my students is having them screenshot whatever the resultant part of the interactive was to show that they did it correctly, and then send the screenshot to me. However, as we're continuing to update these books, you'll find that more and more of any questions that require a response from the student, there'll be some form of, where's that example of the questions that they can actually answer on the spot, like these here, so that they get the immediate feedback, or some kind of embedded quiz that allows you to assign the quiz, let the students answer the questions on the screen, and then you get to report as the teacher whether or not they completed those things and how well they did on them.
Great, thanks. I think with that, I will take this back for a few minutes and present again. We're just going to talk about teaching strategies, and then I'll let you take it back and work your way through maybe explaining some of those teaching strategies and how those work out. So the first thing that we want to talk about is our teacher's guides, and these help you use the CK-12 CCSS interactive resources. They include pacing guides to help you kind of plan out your lessons and your time frame for a unit or the whole course. Standards alignment, clearly. Vocabulary are included, as well as lesson objectives, additional resources, and teaching notes. So really these are geared towards helping you understand kind of all of the ways that you can use our books and plan out your lessons accordingly. We also want to talk about using these flexbooks. So there's a number of different ways that we could think about using them in class. So because they have that self-exploratory piece, in addition to learning, the students can actually explore. So in a classroom environment, you could have them pull up the lesson and talk about, you know, kind of taking a minute to read through it, to explore it, to get a better understanding. So that's one great strategy for using the CCSS Flexbooks in class. If they're working with the actual interactives, they could kind of work with them, hold it on a state, and then talk to their neighbor, almost like a think, pair, share type activity, and compare those states and have a conversation about, well, I got this, you got this, what does that look like? How do we have that discussion and learning happen there? And then because we have active learning problems, they're actually working through pieces. Those might be great warm-ups or introductions to a topic as you work your way through kind of the learning progression of any particular topic area. So options for in class, then as assignments. So because CK-12 easily allows you to assign to class any content for our core modalities, so that includes our interactives, our text modalities, videos, practice, and even real-world applications. All of those you could assign for homework. You just want to make sure that you're assigning both the read or the matching practice if you want grade reports on both and you want students to be required to do both parts. And so when Laramie gets back on and does some demo, he can show you where that assigned to class option is. And that easily assigns content within CK-12 and Google Classroom. And then if you're using a learning management system like Canvas or Schoology or something like that, you could always assign content from within those platforms to your students to see those reports. Another set of strategies for using our Common Core Flexbooks is to kind of have students work on their own. So if you wanted to create a class book, you could have students build their own interactives using GeoGebra or something like that, and then include that in your customized Flexbook, or have them kind of sketch a concept that might be similar, that would give them an idea and understanding what they're working with. And then you could also use our highlighting and note-taking feature to focus on key ideas. And that's something that you could do if you projected a book on a board and kind of worked as a class activity, or students could do in their own CK-12 accounts. So they could just select the key ideas, they can pick a color to highlight, they can note take on there and use that. So hopefully you guys have seen that piece throughout that part, and you have throughout some of these sessions, and then we also have the option to go in there and use it within this particular set of resources. And then finally, the idea of differentiating. So using a mix of examples and active learning to help students explore at their own level. Because we have all of these different resources in this particular Flexbook that include both kind of the exploratory component as well as the understanding and instruction components, it definitely helps you to differentiate. You could even assign different sections or different materials to different students if you're using kind of groupings in classes by creating separate CK-12 classes. So all sorts of options to kind of strategize and think about using these books in your class. We talked about a bunch of these in some of our other sessions and definitely in our teaching strategy session. So we'll talk about that some more as well. But with that, I'm going to pass this back to Laramie and let him share his screen, and then he will be able to show you more about the teaching guides, which I think are super exciting, as well as maybe some of these other assigned to class options and strategy related resources.
Great. Thanks, Katie. I actually had a couple of questions come in here that were people asking me to go a little more slowly over how to find the books, so I'm going to start with that again. I am back at the kind of first CK-12 homepage here, and if you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page, you should see by CK-12, and under that by CK-12 heading, it says Common Core Math. So if you click on that Common Core Math link, that's where the books that we have published for our new interactive series will all appear here. Right now we have, as I mentioned before, the 3 high school books with the 3 supporting teachers guides. And then shortly, I would say probably by the end of August, you'll start seeing the middle school books show up here as well. We are working on those literally daily, trying to get as much of it done as possible for this fall, so that people that would like to start using them will have some material to work with this fall. But right now I'm going to move on into the teacher's guides. These were written by a longtime teacher, mathematics teacher, that went through the CCSS books as if she was teaching a class, and then started writing a guide along the way, step by step, for how these things could best be applied to a classroom environment. So the first one I'm going to show you is the Algebra 1 Teacher's Guide here. And the first sort of thing to notice about all of these is that CK-12's book designer, book customizer program automatically numbers chapters. So in order to make sure that the chapter 1 was numbered as number 1, chapter 2 was numbered as number 2, and so on, all of the sort of header kind of topic information is at the bottom of each of these levels. So the overall scope and sequence for the book is actually numbered here as 6 and at the bottom of the list. And you'll find that that's pretty consistent with the teacher's guides. So let's go ahead and click on that. I want to show you the overall kind of book heading, scope, and sequence. You're going to find here that this is a walkthrough of the book in general. It tells you, of course, that the book is designed for 180 days, tells you how the book or each of the lessons are organized, the parts that are in the lessons, the difference between examples and active learning problems, talks a little about plixes, gives you some ideas of the kinds of materials that are involved in the book itself, what a read is and how the read is laid out, what the different interactives are, different kinds of interactives, other modalities, videos, RWAs, real-world applications, the adaptive practice, and how you might use all these things. And then you're going to find down here, almost 3/4 of the way through this, there's a little highlighted solutions. And the chapter assessments that we actually designed and embedded for the lesson have no other link to the solutions than right here in the teacher's guide. Obviously, it's not something that CK-12 has focused on to provide specific assessment tools and resources for that, but we tried to give you a little bit of a heads up here, a little bit of a head start, I guess. And we gave you some quizzes that go along with each lesson or with each group of lessons. And the solutions for those are only available under this link. And the assumption was that it was least unlikely that too many students were going to go clear through the teacher's guide and go scanning through trying to find a link to the solution. So it should give you a little bit of feeling that that's a good estimate of what they understand without them just going through and copying down solutions for something. There's some examples here for some ways to use the active learning problems, the answers to discussion questions, and so forth. There are some questions that are actual links to our forums that encourage students who aren't in a specific class environment to be able to discuss answers to more complex problems in a forum environment, to our cafe, our math cafe. And then it discusses also the fact that there are some things that are in a lesson that aren't really necessarily considered mandatory parts of the lesson, but that are added in as far as extensions or for scaffolding. And then finally, there are quick estimates of how long each lesson should take. And then finally, at the end of the lesson, or end of the scope and sequence here, there's a quick overview for your purposes of how long each chapter is expected to take and how much material is in each chapter. So you can see this is a very good sort of overall view of what the book has in general. Now let's go back to one of the chapters here. Oops, sorry, go back to the table of contents. And I'm going to open up just the chapter 1 pacing guides. Again, the overall kind of overview for the chapter is the last section here. I'm going to click on that first. Similar to the book overview, the chapter overview gives you sort of a big picture of what's involved with this section of the book. You can see links directly to each of the lessons on the left, links to the Common Core standards that are specifically targeted in each of those lessons so that you can see what the standards themselves are in addition to just their codes. And then all of the resources that are suggested to go along with the lesson as you're teaching it from a teacher's perspective. Here's links to individual plixes. These are those specifically designed quizzes that we put together for each lesson. So they're questions from our adaptive practice that were curated to support the learning in that lesson in specific. And also every so often, like here we go, functions, there's a quiz that was designed to review the material from that group of lessons. So in this case, functions reviews all of the lessons that talk specifically about what a function is and kind of an introduction to functions. And then further down, there'll be another quiz, talks about exponential functions and the quadratic formula. And so throughout the book, you'll find that these specific quizzes are put together in groups. The solutions for those quizzes and the supplemental exercises are under a link over here on the side. And the supplemental exercises are questions that are written for you to use as either homework or extensions. They're actually just lists of questions that you can print out, send home with students, or work with in class with the students if you want. Eventually, these will also be interactive. For now, they're just printables, and they have the solutions as another printable that goes along with it. And finally, there was one other section I want to put out in here. Oh, the RWAs. The links here under the RWAs are to our real-world activities that give the students some idea of how the the concepts taught in that lesson might be used in the real world. Some of these have questions also involved with them. Most of them are just sort of overviews of how these concepts relate to something real, usually some kind of job or some kind of activity in the real world. You also notice here, many of these lessons are actually expected to take more than one instructional period. When that happens, the lesson is actually broken into multiple parts. And you'll see in the teacher's guide for it that there's suggestions as far as what to do each day, so that you can get a feel for how long it should be. So now let's go back and take a look at one of the individual chapter teacher's guides. Again, that was the overview for chapter 1 that we just saw. Now, if we click on the lesson 1 that goes along with the student lesson 1, now we get all the way down into the drilled in detail of what the standards are, vocabulary that you can use to go along with each of the lessons, the goals, the learning outcomes for the lesson, and then any specific other mathematical practices that might be focused on in that particular lesson. There's a purpose of the lesson, why the students are doing it, and then there's an actual step-by-step walkthrough for how to teach each of the instructional periods. And this is one of those ones that has 2 different instructional periods. What we suggest that you do each day, how long we expect each of those parts to take, and then if there's any additional activities or any additional supplemental material, there's another link for that right here in the individual drill down teacher's guide. And then finally, at the end of each of the lessons, teacher's guides, there are notes that were written by the author of that particular lesson, specifically designing or specifically explaining what their goal was as each of the examples or each of the activities were written, so that you as a teacher are able to see specifically what they were hoping each student would get out of each section and what you can focus on as an instructor. So these are obviously extraordinarily detailed teacher's guides. There's a lot of material here that makes your job much easier, I think, and gives you sort of a handbook that you can carry around with you as you're going through instructing these lessons. Now I wanted to show you also some of the things that are involved in the geometry teacher's guide. It's just slightly different. So let's go back down to the Common Core Math, again at the bottom of the page, and choose the geometry teacher's guide. I'm again going to go to the bottom here, the teaching this course section. The geometry has a significant amount of actual activity, like projects that are based as a part of the course. So there's some information here in the differences between the geometry book and the algebra book. There are some questions that are designed for those projects to help the students feel comfortable with what they're doing, and those sort of that emphasis questions. This has, again, that same overview, and you'll see in the overview and in the overall scope and sequence that there are sections here that talk about the projects for this class. Now, what I wanted to show you here, go back up to the table of contents.
Hey, Laramie, can we have you just share kind of where you got to, how you got to that page again? It was a little fast to kind of get to any page, and so a couple people want to just kind of figure out where you are and thus scrolling up and down. That would be great. Thanks.
Good. Thank you so much. I appreciate you bringing that up. So again, I'm Common Core Math under basically the bottom of any page by CK-12 Common Core Math. And the teacher's guides are the second row. So I clicked on the Interactive Geometry Teacher's Guide. And then at the end of each of the tables of contents is that teaching this course section. It's the same for the algebra, for the geometry, and for the algebra 2. And then under that teaching this course, or the overall scope and sequence, is that kind of the handbook, top-down handbook that tells you where everything is in that particular book. And all 3 of them have that little hidden solution section you'll find in here that I mentioned in the algebra. So what I wanted to show you here from, again, that table of contents, I'm just going back to the table of contents of here using my breadcrumbs, is the midterm project and the final project. The midterm and final in the geometry are huge. They are very, very detailed. You could probably build an entire class out of just following the midterm and final projects alone. All of the details are here for walking through. If I remember right, the midterm for the geometry is a tiling project that talks a lot about tessellation. And it shows the teacher's guide links are here. There's specific handouts that you can give to the students. There are designed, sort of bespoke, custom designed interactives that were built for that midterm. And then there's another one also for the final. The final, if I remember right on this one, was a interior design project where the students are supposed to design an area and then figure out how to fit everything into it they're supposed to fit into it. It was based on a college interior design course. So again, some kind of interesting real world applications of how geometry is used in the workplace. And the final project and the midterm project are both very detailed step-by-step applications of that for you as a teacher. Similar to the algebra, if we look at the chapter pacing guides, so here from the table of contents, I just click on the chapter. At the end of the chapter pacing guide, of course, is the scope and sequence for that chapter, just like it is for the algebra. There's your sort of table overview of what's involved in that particular chapter's worth of lessons. Many of the lessons are 2 periods, some are only 1 period, but you can get a feel overall for how long it's supposed to take. Total of 12 to 19 instructional days, 6 quizzes, 1 single review, and then 1 chapter assessment. Again, all of those assessments are in the links are here in the overview for that chapter, and then the solutions are right next to them. And then if we go back to the chapter title here, I'm just going to pick any one of these lessons. It doesn't matter. Just again, like the algebra, there's that drilled in sort of deep review step-by-step of what you can do in that particular day, how long each section is expected to take, which examples specifically to go over with the students, how long they're expected to work on those examples, and then links to external resources that support the material, but aren't necessarily mandatory as far as teaching it from a direct standpoint. And then finally, I want to show the Algebra 2. Again, I'm going to scroll to the bottom of the page, Common Core Math. Let's go to the Algebra 2 Teacher's Guide. Again, we have the Algebra 2 has 5 primary chapters and 1 sort of supplemental chapter that's all about statistics. The Common Core includes statistics, but it isn't expected to be a primary focus for high school students. So we wanted to make sure you had the material for teaching that, but make sure that it was obvious that that isn't always included in an Algebra 2 course. And then of course, just like the others, you have your overview, teaching the course, same kinds of materials we had in the other 2 books. So that's kind of a feel for how the teacher's guides are organized, the material that's available in the teacher's guides, and how you as a teacher can use those to guide you in preparing for your class and using the materials that we have already for you to try and make things easier as you're in your instruction. Now, I want to take just a couple of seconds here to make sure there aren't any questions about this, but then I would like to take about 5 minutes or so and give you a preview of what's going on with our middle school math, because that's slightly different. To make sure there aren't any questions that we should jump on with the teacher's guides first. Katie?
Larry, we had a couple of questions here. One has to do with the difficulty level. So you can see right at the top there, that at-grade difficulty level. And that was, are there books for advanced and kind of the basic versions like we have for some of our other resources at this time?
That's a fantastic question. We are working on those. What we're going to do is take these books and adjust them up and adjust them down for an honors course and a basic course. Right now, we do not have separate books for that, but you'll find that the teacher's guide for all 3 does have quite a bit of scaffolding available. It says for advanced students or for particularly challenged students, do this or add that. So there's quite a bit of flexibility built into these already, and there will be specific books for those other levels later. There's just not yet.
Thanks. And then another question was kind of, a couple of people are wondering kind of, you navigated to this via a link in the bottom, like, can they find these books somewhere else? So maybe like for the algebra geometry that are already live, you could show them how to get to that just like you would any other flex book?
Sure. So if you go again from the CK-12 homepage here, we just pick a subject, in this case, say algebra. We choose Flexbook Textbooks as the second tab here. And these are all high school books. So we're going to choose the high school tab. And you'll find Interactive Algebra 1 for CCSS is right here. And I must have scrolled past the Algebra 2. I didn't see it. I don't see the Algebra 2. It should be in here. I don't know where the Algebra 2 book is, but it should be in this same list. And I'll check and make sure that that's done after our conference is over here. But you can access those same books, just like any of our other flex books in the same list. I usually scroll to the bottom of the page because every page has that same link. and I found that to be more convenient, but certainly you can find them by going through the browse pages as well.
Great. And then I'm going to make one note for everyone else, and then I have one more question for you before you continue on. We had some people asking about interactives kind of in our offline reader and our app. That is not fully supported at this point in time. We're kind of working on updates to those pieces. So you might or might not have easy access to kind of bump into that from a browser on a phone into that app, or kind of different parts. So just know that we're working on that development as we work on the development of the interactives as well. And then we had a question about elementary content. So right now you just talked about the high school books, you're about to demo middle school books. Will there be more elementary Common Core math available this year? Or are you going to be writing it for younger grades? If so, what's the time frame?
Kindergarten through 4, math has always been, I would say, not our primary priority as far as content development, just because we've had so much overwhelming response to our upper level content. We have had serious discussions about how we need to improve our kindergarten level mathematics, but at this point we need to finish the high school and the middle school content first. Then we will be working toward building similar books to what I'm about to show you with our middle school Common Core. We will be building that kind of content for our elementary math, but I would guess probably looking late into next year before that happens.
Okay, thanks. And we've gotten a couple other questions that maybe, at one, if you happen to see a statistic, if you have any statistics lessons built into these and can demo an example of that, that'd be great as you're kind of working your way through. If not, we'll point that particular person towards our full statistics books. And then just as you're making this transition from high school books, there's a question about what's the difference between interactive high school books and PLIX available for middle school books. So maybe if you were going to show a stats lesson, maybe I'll let you do that first.
Sure. So the stats, we had that section for stats in the Algebra 2 book. So I went down again to the bottom of the page, Common Core Math, CK-12 Interactive Algebra 2. And then we have that chapter on advanced statistics. This whole section here is just statistics. And you'll find that there is quite a bit of multimedia in here. I probably picked the one lesson that didn't have it. But yes, you'll find that there are a number of lessons in this particular chapter that have the interactivity built in. There's also, if I remember right, some amount of statistics in chapter 5 also, yeah. Chapter 5 has sort of the introduction to statistics, and there are embedded interactives for this chapter as well. So there is definitely some statistics here that incorporates that interactivity.
Great, thanks. And then as you transition to middle school, if you can just talk about the difference between interactive high school books versus the PLIX that we currently have available for middle school as well.
Okay, so let me see if I understand that question correctly. If I understand, the question here is essentially what is the difference between embedding things into the lesson and sending students sort of outside of the lesson to work on PLIX. Does that sound like a...
Yeah, that does it. And from there, you can take it to middle school.
Okay, sounds good.
Thanks.
So yeah, absolutely. When we first started writing these interactive books, actually the very first thing we did was realize that we could take our PLIX links and incorporate them in our lessons so that students weren't required to go somewhere else on our site and find a PLIX to support the learning that they were encountering in a specific lesson. So the very first thing we did was just embed PLIX in lessons. And we thought that was fantastic. There's an example of it down here. Yeah, like this one here. So this was sort of the first example of interactivity in our new interactive books. Then we realized that it was still sort of a step away from the reading for a student to click on this, open another window, and then interact with that PLIX, and then afterward come back to the lesson and try and continue on. And there's been some research and some of our own sort of personal experience that says that it's difficult to get students to do that process, to just actually go and interact with something and come back instead of just, oh geez, that's something I don't need to do. I think I'll go on to the next question. So our next step was to take some of the interactivity out of these PLIXs. Here's that one I linked on here. So sort of take that frame of interactivity itself and embed it directly in a lesson, like this one up here, so that the students don't have to go anywhere. They're still staying in the read, they're still focused directly on the material, but they have sort of the instructions and then the specific goals that they're expected to accomplish right here in the lesson. And I think that makes it feel more like it's part of what they're expected to do. And in fact, we made a very strong effort to make the reading and the material that's surrounding those interactives in the read, in the written lesson here, directly relate to what's in this as well. So the students really get a feel that this is part of the instruction. It's not just something extra that you have to go do that's going to take up your time unnecessarily, which sounds like something one of my students would say. But the goal here was to really keep them involved and try and make the content itself more engaging rather than just add something else to the content. Because that's really the biggest difference. You can definitely do the same kinds of things with our existing books. As I'm sure most of you know by this point, if you are on the homepage and you scroll down to our Plix link here, there are, I think, something like 1,500 Plix available that cover all of our branches of mathematics. So you can always find something that supports whatever you're teaching. But the real advantage to having it as a part of the book, A, is that the students see it there on the spot, and B, you don't have to go looking for the Plix that might really directly relate to what you're teaching. So with that said, our middle school books are the ones that we're in process now, are slightly different in format from our high school books. The teacher's version of the book is essentially an enhanced, more detailed and expanded version of the student edition. And the student edition is really designed to be extremely engaging. It's supposed to have really nothing that would take the student out of the idea that learning is something that's involving, something that's exciting, something that's valuable for them. So if we look at the teacher's guide for one of our new lessons here, you'll see that it has all the focus information, or the standard information, the prerequisite standards, the things that really support what's coming up to this lesson, what the goals of a lesson are, your agenda, how long we expect each part to take. And then there's detailed information about what each section of the lesson requires, how the students are going to apply it, what the students are going to see as they're reading it. Generally speaking, the black text in this teacher's version shows approximately what the students specifically are going to read. And then in this particular one, sorry, there's some blue text that said these are underway. This is information to us, but lots of images, activities that specifically not just relate to the information in the lesson, but actually teach the material in the lesson directly as a part of an activity. So the teacher's version then has the written versions of the questions that the students will see in an interactive mode, shows you specifically what their interactivity is going to be. As you can see, lots of interactivity. And then a wrap-up review question section, and then extensions that you can use as a teacher that will allow you to build on to the material that's actually in the lesson. And if we take a look at the student version for, in this case, the same lesson, you'll see that there's a limited amount of text. This is sort of analogous to that first couple of paragraphs in the teacher's guide here. So here was the teacher's version. And then the student version, you'll see, has significantly limited text. More exciting interactivity. Again, lots of images. Those interactives here, very little text as far as what the interactives are, and then nothing underneath them or around them, but specifically the questions that they're expected to answer. So as the students are going through these, there's going to be very little to distract them from the actual meat of the learning, and in most cases, that learning will take place as part of an interactive, so that they're not feeling like they're just looking at specific lists of questions. There's no walls of text in the middle school math books at all. An example of the middle school math 6, for instance. Here's one of our student editions for the math 6 books. You'll see like this interactive here has them sort shapes. It's talking about ratios. And as they sort the shapes, the tool keeps track of where they're putting them, regardless of where in the boxes they go. And then once they're done actually sorting them as they're requested to do, a series of questions shows up. Oops. Yeah, I can't talk and sort colors at the same time, sorry. As they're done sorting the colors here, a set of questions appears and asks them questions about what the different ratios are, how ratios work, and so forth. all through the lesson, you'll see here's some of those embedded questions. This one here is a specific embedded quiz. The students see the questions, they can answer them on the spot, they can check their answers, they can get hints just like any of our other adaptive practice questions, but they're part of the lesson. And when they're done with the questions, you get a report as an instructor that tells you what they've done, how well they did they try more than once, how long did they spend working on it, and so forth. So these books, like I said, we're expecting to have beta versions available by the end of August, so that they will be usable this fall, but they will be sort of polished by certainly late this year. And we're expecting to take this same kind of really deep interactive based learning and apply it back to some of the things we did in the high school books earlier. So very excited about these.
Cool, thank you, Laramie. We have a couple of questions in here that I'm gonna pose to you. One is, can students do questions with a partner? So like, for example, that ratio of numbers of red blocks to blue blocks, could they do that with a partner? What would you recommend?
Certainly, absolutely. I would say that for most of the interactives, because they're designed to be formative rather than summative, pardon me, sorry, most of the interactives aren't expected to be separately graded. So yes, I would definitely say that it's a great idea to sort of assign students in pairs to answer the questions here. And like I said, in my classroom, what I was doing was having the students complete the interactive and then screenshot the sections that they, sort of the completion page once the questions are answered. And you can have them submit those screenshots to you in pairs or groups of 3 or 5, whatever you decide to do in your class. But yes, absolutely. I think the interactives in particular are great for that.
Great. And since we're talking about assignments here, maybe you could just scroll up to the left and show the quick little assign to class option if you were going to assign this read to your students.
Absolutely, yes. Assign to class is in the top left of any of our reads. So obviously it also works for our Common Core. If you just click assign to class, you're given the option to assign it to a CK-12 class that you previously created, or to a Google Classroom class if you're integrated with Google Classroom. Once that's assigned, any students that are in those classes will see it as an assignment. They'll see the instructions that you type in and any due date that you add to it. And then once they open that lesson on their end, they'll see a little button at the top of the read that says turn in, so that you know they've actually at least observed the read. You can also, for any of the lessons where we have these embedded quizzes, there'll be the option to actually assign this quiz separately, so that not only will you know that they turned in the read with their little turn in button that'll appear up here, but also that they've completed the questions individually in that read.
Great. And then we have a question kind of about the process we went through in creating these. It was a question about researching every standard and including in each Flexbook or as many as possible. Like, how did you go about kind of picking the sections within these books? And did we make sure that we addressed all of the Common Core standards in the process?
Yes, and this is going to get ugly for just a second because I'm going to see if I can show you my spreadsheet, because I think it's fascinating from this standpoint. There was a very, very extensive process for designing the scope and sequence for these books. In particular, the middle school math, but very similar for the high school math. Middle school math obviously is still in process, so I have this kind of near the top of my memory as far as what's involved. But you'll see that each of the tables of contents for the books has been laid out in detail before the books are even written. It shows specifically what standards are prerequisite, what the focus standard for each lesson is, and what any additional standards for each lesson might hit. And these were specifically designed to make sure that all of the content that's expected to be hit in each grade level is hit appropriately, and that the amount of time and attention spent on each of those standards is appropriate. You'll find that you can sort of compare these to, say, Engage New York, or oh geez, there was another interactive course I can't think of the name of right now, but certainly you can definitely compare these directly to the Common Core suggested series of content. And absolutely, if you go through the Math 6, Math 7, Math 8 books, you'll cover every topic that you're supposed to cover as far as Common Core, and you'll spend a reasonable amount of time or an expected amount of time on each of them. Illustrated Math, thank you very much, anonymous attendee. That's exactly the other one I was thinking.
Thanks, Laramie. I think with that, I'm going to steal this back so we can kind of wrap up some key things. And as always, we will stay on and answer more questions if you have them. But we definitely want to go through a few key pieces. One, just at the bottom, right near that, where Laramie was showing you Common Core Math, you'll see to the left of it, a tools and apps link. The ck12.org/tools and apps short link will also get you to this page, and that will give you information for accessing our Flexbook app offline, as well as information about learning management systems that we're integrated with. So if you're using Classroom or Canvas or Schoology or something like that, there's a little bit more information and links to join and kind of connect on that end to assign all of these wonderful resources that Laramie has been talking about. If you're new to Flexbooks, if this is the first Flexbook session you've taken with us, then I recommend joining us for one of the other sessions where this is our last session of this week, but we're going to offer all of them again next week. So you can join us for getting started or advanced Flexbook editing. So if you're interested in customizing these and mixing and matching sections and chapters, by all means, join us for that. And then you guys are here for Common Core Math, so I'm assuming the non-STEM piece isn't as relevant, but if any of you are teaching at lower grades and want to join us for that to kind of cover other areas in your class as well, that might be useful. We also have assignment sessions. So we briefly just talked about that assigned to class feature, but you can join us for any of those sessions for the basics on our adaptive practice, customizing that practice, or assigning content into or within some of our integrated systems. And feel free to join us for any of those next week as well. And then finally, we talked briefly about teaching strategies for using CK-12. Those, we did an entire hour webinar on that, actually I think this morning, that talks about how you can use those to personalize learning for students. So feel free to join us for that one next week. And then if you're interested, you're excited about these Plix interactives and some of our interactive components within CK-12, you might want to join us for our Simulations and Plix webinar. That is being offered twice next week, so you could join for either session to learn more about all the detailed components of not the quick little embedded interactives, but the embedded Plix, as well as our physics and chemistry simulations. We're offering 3 bonus pieces. We are rolling out this fall the first round of what we're calling Flexbooks 2.0. So you can see kind of like a nice different interface, easy access to practice and different pieces here. We did a quick little bit of that in our brush up and update session this week. And on Monday, our CTO is actually going to do a live demo of what that's going to look like. And some of our Common Core books are going to be available in that when it rolls out. Kind of similarly, the algebra and geometry ones that we have been seeing today that are completed. So if you want to join us for that on Monday, you can register in the CEP Google class and definitely join us and ask Miral questions, have him demo pieces, and go from there. Next Friday, we are hosting a series of live chats. So one of the biggest responses we got last year that teachers asked for was the chance to talk to others in their area or their field. And so we're hosting 30-minute chats kind of in breakout sessions on Friday, and you're welcome to join us for any of those or more than one. If you're not sure which one you fit in best, feel free to join us for a couple of them. We'll hopefully see you there. And then for all of you that are asking about, sorry, one more piece. Our Jumpstart for Educators Cafe is another place to talk to your colleagues and ask questions. How did you use this in a class? What might you recommend here? I have this great idea. Anyone want to collaborate? So feel free to use that forum to help you with that. And then ask me anything. For those of you that are asking, why are you, what's the focus? Right now you're doing middle school. Are you ever going to do this? Where are we going? What does that look like? And how did we get here? Your chance to ask our co-founder, Nira Khosla, is this coming Wednesday. She'll join for a 30-minute live conversation and answer some of those questions for you. You're welcome to register and email us with any questions you want her ready and willing to answer as you go. As always, our session resource page has some great information about this session that can be found in the Google Classroom. So feel free to use that and share that. And then the assignment for this is also in there. If you're not sure about assignments, go back to that introductory session we did, those first 5 videos, and one of them talks about navigating Google Classroom. That might be super helpful if you're having difficulty looking and finding assignments and session resources. And then our feedback form. So there's one under feedback in that Google class, and this we are messaging a whole bunch of fun, important links. I think they already went out in the chat window that you can directly do so that you can answer any questions for us and help us continue to improve. And with that, I'm going to go back to live Q&A with Laramie, but we thank you for joining us. So feel free to go if you are all set. So Laramie, do we have any questions that we want to start answering?
There are a couple of them here. One is how we integrate integrate GeoGebra into a CK-12 lesson. Many of the new interactive books specifically use GeoGebra interactives. Many of them are also written using our own Plix tool. But you'll see in more of our advanced Flexbook design webinars how that you can embed interactivity in our lessons, and certainly the GeoGebra interactives are definitely workable for that. I've done it myself. So I would definitely recommend checking in on one of our advanced Flexbook editing webinars to see how to do that specifically. We have another question here about finding the answers at the end. I'm assuming that's a question about the teacher's guide. So let me show that again real quick. For those of you that are still on and would like to see that, just grab my screen here once more. So I'm going to go back to the home page, scroll down to the bottom, Common Core. I'm going to pick, say, the Algebra Teacher's Guide, either in the overall scope and sequence or the chapter scope and sequence. At the bottom of the chapter scope and sequence, again, is that overview. And in your sort of table of resources, you'll see the supplemental exercises here, the solutions, and then these chapter quizzes are, like, where's one of them here? Functions quiz here. These chapter quizzes are actually built in the CK-12 tool, so they have the answers that go along with them immediately. The overall, like the midterm and final, if we go back to the book overview here, you'll see at the middle of the instructions under chapter assessments, there's that link to the solutions that's only found in the teacher's guide right here. I realize they're a little bit buried. That was kind of the point. But all three of them have them in the same location. If you go to that book overview, you'll see that there's a link specifically for the solutions there. And it looks like we have a question about the difference between Plix and interactives. Mentioned this sort of really quickly earlier, but the biggest difference really is that the Plix have questions that were written to go along with the Plix, whereas the embedded interactives have questions that were written to go along with the lesson. So if I look at one of our student lessons here, here's the interactive that goes with this specific section of the lesson on reflections. Any questions that appear below it will be specifically related to reflections and the content in this lesson, and the students use this interactive to help them answer it. If this were a Plix, let's see if I have an example of one. For an embedded Plix, they open, and I'll just go to one on the home page. If they open a Plix, the Plix opens in a separate page, and the questions that go along with it are specifically related to that interactive, but may or may not be directly related to the learning in whatever lesson they're associated with. So these challenge me questions that appear here are directly related to what happens in this window, but not necessarily to anything else directly in a read.
Thanks, Laramie. We have a Flexbook 2.0 question and being available. We're rolling out some of those for this fall. The exact timeline, you are welcome to join us and ask our CTO. He probably has a better exact date on that particular piece, but we're aiming for fall for our first round of a limited run of our books, and then we'll be rolling more into that. We're really kind of beta testing that and working our way through that at this time. So I think we are out of questions from here. If you have any others, please feel free to email support, and we look forward to seeing some of you guys back next week. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone.